Morning everyone, and welcome to the 54th in the Learn with Lorna series, this week looking at castles of the Highlands. I'll just wait a few seconds for people to join us and then we'll get cracking on this one. Hi Eleanor. Morning everyone. Yes, not very spring-like. It's not too bad here, but I'm not holding anything crossed for how long it'll be. And I'm seeing if it's rainy in Rose Hall, it might pass down to us. So we'll see. So welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna. As I say, the 54th in the series. My name is Lorna. My name is Learn with Lorna. I've started staying now. It's like I have no other identity anymore. My name is Lorna Steele, and I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service. Learn with Lorna, just a quick summary, started out a year ago, initially to introduce school children to the records of the Highland Archive Service while they were out of school, when they were home learning, and then very quickly broadened out into a range of subjects for a range of audiences. So lots of different people, from tour guides to people right across the world to teachers, all sorts of different people. So whichever of those categories you fall into, it's really lovely to have you with us. The Highland Archive Service, as I've mentioned before, has 4 offices. So we have the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness, Skye and Lochailse Archive Centre in Portree, Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William, and Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives in Wick. And between the 4 of us, we make up the Highland Archive Service. Before I go into this week's subject, a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer, that High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part in these events. But if you are able to donate towards our work, we very much appreciate that. And I know that I say that every week, but really I can't overstate how much we are truly grateful for those of you who have been able to donate and support us. It's been, as you'll be all well aware, it's been a difficult year for many organisations, and we really appreciate any support that you have given us. So thank you so much for that. I'm just seeing that comment there saying that you've done the survey. Thank you for that. That was the next thing I've got on a bullet point to mention. Thank you to those of you who have read our newsletter, who've signed up to our event looking at the 45, the Jacobites in the Battle of Culloden. And thank you so much to those of you who have completed the survey so far. I don't get to see these until later on, so I'm going on faith that people are filling it in, but thank you so much if you have done that. If you haven't, it's in the comments of this film, so please do take a few minutes to fill in the survey about what this series has meant to you, if anything, if you've enjoyed it, if it's made a difference to you through lockdown, and please do take a few moments to fill that out. It really is appreciated, and it will that will help us when we're talking to our board and things about what we've been doing, and that's really appreciated if you're able to take a second to do that. So this month we are looking at the subject of landmarks and locations, and we started last week with Alexander Ross, who the famous architect, very prolific architect across the Highlands, and this week it's another huge subject covering the whole of the Highlands and hundreds of years. This week we're looking at the subject of castles. Now, there's a strong association with castles and the image of Britain and the image of Scotland, and if anyone is watching this in Britain, then I would be willing to say they're probably not that far from a castle. I don't know if we have any watchers in Wales, but if there are, then they will certainly be near to a castle. A conservative estimate puts it at about 2,000 castles in Scotland, but it's likely to be and have been many more than that. And the Highlands, when I was trying to think about how to structure this talk and how to kind of pull some of the stories, I jotted down this list. In the Highlands we have castles that are now entirely lost, such as Abercross. Castles which lie in ruins, such as Dunskeith or Dunskeith in Skye. Castles that have been in long-term occupation, such as Castle Loud or Dunrobin. Castles that have been completely restored from ruin, such as Mingray or Elandonnan. Castles that have been turned into hotels, like Dornoch and Tulloch. Castles that still have a current royal connection, such as the Castle of May. castles on islands like Loch-and-Dor, but Castle Cheerham, castles as homes, castles which are homes and tourist attractions and visitor attractions such as Cawdor Castle. We even have castles that are used as offices like Inverness Castle, and so it's quite it's a big subject and a lot of potential stories that I could pull. And of course castles, to my mind anyway, and do give me your thoughts on this, but they have an endless fascination for people, and I think they have an endless fascination for both locals and visitors to an area. And I think it's because they have such a tangible physical link to the past. You can stand in the building and be literally surrounded by history and stories. They have a connection to stories of romance, of battle, of legends, and fundamentally castles are connected to power. They're connected to the people who have held the power and been involved in some of our nation's biggest stories. Jenny, I'm seeing your comment there about there being no castles where you live in Australia. It was funny, when I was first in New Zealand, it was one of the things I found most strange, going around and thinking there's not that legacy of long-standing, hundreds of years buildings in the way that we're used to in this country. Obviously a huge amount of other history, but not quite the same physical building history. So given all of that, it would be absolutely impossible for me to incorporate all of that and encapsulate all those stories. So what I'm going to do is pull some stories and some castles, and I am very, very well aware that there will be many important castles and stories that I don't refer to. So please know from the beginning that I know that. We don't hold early original records for many castles because they are so obviously built so long ago, many of them, that those records may not survive. But we do hold references to castles across many other collections. So for instance, later building repair plans or correspondence from people who are living or visiting castles, references to castles in maps, things like that. And I'll point out those documents where we have them. But we're starting in the north. So we're starting with two castles in Caithness, Sinclair, Garnico, and the Castle of May. And these two castles share a connection, and that is why our team in Nucleus picked these two to talk about. So I'm saying that they're two castles. It was originally thought that Sinclair Garnico was actually was itself two castles, but that has since been disproved, and that it was just one castle that had been built on over the generations. But that's why it has that double name. So we're going to start there. Now this castle was the ancient seat of the Sinclair Earls of Caithness. Stunning location. If you're not familiar with it, do have a look at it online. It's the most beautiful location north of Wick at Noss Head, sitting on the edge of a cliff, a very dramatic site overlooking the sea. So of course a very strategic site, which is something you'll hear me refer back to again and again throughout this. It's ruined now, but it still remains one of the best surviving examples of a medieval or early modern castle, a fortified complex. And it was built in around about 1470 and then gradually added to over the next 200 or so years. It's the only castle in Scotland which appears on the World Monuments Fund list. And as well as serving as the Sinclair seat, it has also been occupied by Cromwell's troops during the Civil War. It went on possibly to be damaged by cannon fire, although that's something that's been questioned. But it's been uninhabited since 1690. It finally passed out of the Sinclair family, but then eventually was bought back and donated to a trust. And the trust went and carried out a huge amount of archaeological investigations, eventually opening the site to the public. And we hold pictures and leaflets and things relating to the later stage of this castle. So how does this castle link to Castle of May, another famous Caithness castle, which was famously owned by Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother? Well, George Sinclair, who was the fourth Earl of Caithness, who had his family seat at Sinclair Garnico, which I've mentioned, he had several sons, including John, the Master of Caithness, William, and George, possibly others. That I can't be sure. And the Earl himself was a very powerful man and very brutal. He had quite a few enemies. And he sent his son out. John, his son, the Master of Caithness, was sent out to attack one of his father's enemies, who was Hugh Murray, who was kind of holed up and taken refuge in Dornoch in Sutherland to try and keep safe from this attack. And this was in around about 1570. Now, John laid siege to the castle in Dornoch successfully. He returned, so he had done what his father had asked and had been successful, returned to his father with 3 hostages that he had negotiated, 3 hostages as part of Murray's surrender agreement. But his father refused to agree to the terms that his son had set and ordered the killing of the hostages and the complete burning of Dornoch. And John the son refused to take part in the killing of the hostages or the burning of Dornoch, although other people went and did that. But John fled to Ray, where he stayed for several years, and he only returned to the family home on the understanding that there was going to be a reconciliation. But what happened instead was his father, the Earl, had him chained up and thrown in the castle dungeon, and he languished there for about 7 years. He did attempt to escape. He attempted with the help of his jailer, but his brother William overheard the plot, discovered what they were planning, and had the jailer beheaded and the head put on a spike over the castle. And when William, the brother, came to tell John that his plot had been foiled and that they had killed the jailer, John, and they don't know how, but somehow John managed to break free or to somehow kill his brother William in revenge for this. Now, there are conflicting stories about what happened in the end to John, but it seems possible that food was kept back from him, so he was starved, and then he was given salt beef to eat, and because he was so hungry, he ate greedily at the salt beef, but they didn't give him any water to drink, and so he died of thirst. A pretty nasty way to go, but we'll see this as we go through castles. So the connection to the other castle is that in about between 1566, 1570s, George Sinclair, who you'll remember was the father, built the Castle of May, and he built that for the son William. But after he had been killed, it went to his other son George, and that's the connection between those 2 castles. And over time, the Castle of May was redeveloped and extended. It became known as Barragill Castle, changed its name, and it, much like Sinclair Garnico, eventually left the Sinclair family with the death of George, the 15th Earl of Caithness, in 1889. He had no heirs, so he left the castle to a friend of his on the condition that he changed his name to Sinclair. In World War II, the Castle of May was requisitioned for the Company of the Black Watch. Again, still relevant, hundreds of years later, still relevant that it has a strategic coastal location with a lookout over the sea. And then gradually after the war, it fell into disrepair and was abandoned until 1952, when Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was visiting on holiday in the area, learned about the story of the castle and purchased the castle in 1952. And she renovated, restored it. She changed its name back to its original name, the Castle of May. And you may remember I spoke about the Hetty Monroe collection. Well, it was Hetty Monroe who furnished the Castle of May from her antique shop for Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And it was the only house that the Queen Mother ever owned. And she stayed there every August until her death in 2002, so 50 years of kind of loyal visiting the Castle of May. And it's still stayed in today by the royal family. They still come up for a few days in the summer, but it's also open now as a visitor attraction for people to go and see. And we hold the plans of the Castle of May in Nucleus in our Caithness archives, and that's part of the Sinclair MacDonald Architects collection. So you may recall last week that I spoke about Sinclair MacDonald and the fact that he trained under Alexander Ross. So again, one of my all-time favourite things, all the connections that can be made across these collections. Is marvellous. So I've spoken before about, throughout the course of these talks, about the impact that troops can have on buildings like the Castle of May. And you can see that across even the 2 castles I've mentioned so far. Cromwell's troops have an impact. World War I has an impact. World War II has an impact. And it's that feeling of the castle being, as I say, still having a strategic and important location, but also just being needed at a moment of national crisis. And so damage being done and repairs being required afterwards. And you can see that in big country houses right across the country, and I'm entirely sure in other countries as well. And the other thing that you can often see, almost always see in these castles, is that change of use and look that is completely inevitable with a building that has such a long age. The only thing generally I think that would stop that progression of use and development and changing with the styles of the time sometimes is a political thing. So for instance, right out with our area, but Traquair House is an example that is kind of stopped at one moment because of their loyalty to one political cause. So it's interesting to see how the politics and the surrounding national state can have an impact on these buildings. So coming down from Caithness, coming through Sutherland, we're going to pass Dunvegen Castle. We don't hold a vast amount to do with Dunvegen, but it was the seat, or is the seat of the Earls and Dukes of Sutherland for over 600 years. And it's an example of a castle that's maintained a long family connection, but also has had that changing purpose as required. So it served as a naval hospital in World War I. It served as a boys' boarding school in the 1960s and 70s. And it's another castle that has seen extensive transformation over the years, from a fortified, basic square keep, right through to the Scots baronial castle that you see today, a very beautiful building. And again, that sits on the coast, overlooking, just near Golspie, overlooking the coast. Coming through Sutherland into Ross and Cromarty, I'll come on to in a second, but before I go any further, just a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part in these events. So I'm coming down, and as I've said, I am so aware that I am passing castles that deserve to be mentioned, but I only have a short space of time. So the castle I want to speak about briefly next is Fowles Castle, just outside Eventon, not far from Dingwall. And as I say, I'm aware, even coming through Ross and Cromarty, that I'm going past Castle Loud and Beaufort and Bran Castle and Tulloch and all sorts of others with stories. It may merit another talk. But I wanted to mention Fowles Castle because Fowles is the home of the Monroe chiefs. And like all the castles that I have mentioned and that I will mention, it has a long history, and one that I'll touch on more in our Culloden event next week, if any of you are attending that. The castle has been on the site of Fowles Castle since about the 11th century, but much of the present day castle dates from the 1700s. But the reason I wanted to highlight Fowles is that we hold an extensive Monroe of Fowles collection. It is one of those collections that it's so exciting to work with. It's very legal. It's largely writs and charters and say-scenes and legal documents. But it is one of those collections that remind you what an utter privilege it is to work with archives, because the documents are hundreds of years old, and we have the privilege of working with them and looking at them, and it never ceases to be a privilege. So as I said, this is a large collection of legal documents, and it includes our oldest document, which is from 1299. And that document records the transfer of the barony of Edgedour, including Castle, from Elizabeth Byseth to William, the Earl of Ross. So even our earliest document makes reference to a castle. And also within that collection, lots of other references to charters being signed and sealed at castles, things like that. And again, it ties into that the castles being the place where the power often resides in an area. So we're going to carry on through Ross and Cromarty over the Keswick Bridge. I'm not going to go left. When I come to the Keswick Bridge, I'm not going to go towards Nairn, and so for today I will be bypassing Cawdor and Kilrock, and Cawdor is my favourite castle, so I feel very bad about it. But the reason I'm doing that is we hold a lot of correspondence within our Bailey of Dunane collection, another fabulous collection, and a lot of correspondence there which includes letters written from Castle Loud, from Bran Castle, from Cawder, Kilrock, and so I'm going to do a Baillie of Dunane talk later in the year, and I will come back and refer to those documents there. So instead, we're going right from the Keswick Bridge, we're going down the A82, we're going to Fort William and Lochaber. Now, the other thing to say before I carry on down towards Fort William is that I've already done a talk about Inverness Castle, so if you're interested in the story of Inverness Castle and its ongoing transformation into a visitor attraction through the Spirit of the Highlands project, please do go back and have a look at that talk, which you can find on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook pages, so please do have a look at that one. Again, I'm going to go past Urquhart Castle on the banks of Loch Ness, which I'm sure some of you will be familiar with, because I'll talk about that in Jacobite Week, because that's had such a role within the Jacobite risings. And also going to go past Aldowrie Castle on the other side of Loch Ness, because I spoke about that a little bit in our Fraser Tytler Week. We hold letters from Aldowrie, leases of the estate, drawings of the castle, sketches of the rooms, things like that, but I covered that in Fraser Tytler Week. So I'm going on to Lochaber. Now there are loads of important, historic, interesting castles in Lochaber, such as Castle Cheetham, which was the Clanranald seat, which was connected strongly to the lordship of the Isles and the Jacobite risings. But I'm going to quickly mention our Cameron of Lochiel collection, which again I have done a talk on, so if you want to go back and have a look in more detail at the Lochiel collection, then please do that. But there's an entire section of that catalogue that is dedicated to Achnacarry Castle. 100 years worth of information about repairs, ledgers, furnishings, game lists, all sorts of things to do with the management and running of a castle. And of course that's a little bit later, so the stories we've talked about so far really are sort of back in the 1600s, stories that turn into legends. There's also a very practical side to running a castle, which we can see in the likes of the Lochiel collection and the Fraser Tytler collection, of leasing the castle out and repairs that need to be done, and what can you do to offset the cost of repairing something in such a big building. So there's that whole other side to the castles as well. And again, within the Lochiel collection, a lot of references to other castles. So for instance, there's correspondence from Lord Lovat at Beaufort Castle, correspondence from the royal family at Glamis, Balmoral and Windsor. And Lord Lovat is another one I will come back to. I'm going to do a whole separate talk on Lord Lovat because he absolutely merits it. So yeah, please do have a look back at the Lochiel collection for more about that. But for today, I'm going to have a quick look at one castle in Lochaber, which is the absolutely stunning and lovely Mingaray Castle near Kilhone in Ardnamurchan. This is a historic seat of the MacIans, and it's a great example of a castle which has been restored, refurbished from ruin. It was built in the late 1200s, again coastal, it's looking over the Sound of Mull. Again, it's another one that do have a look at it. It's a beautiful, beautiful castle, hexagonal, big, solid, the sort of thing that if you were 5 and someone said draw a castle, that's what you would draw. And so yes, it was believed to be likely to have been built by the MacDougals of Lorne in about the 1200s. And again, as with all buildings of such age, it has witnessed conflict and just innumerable stories of people and life. It played a role in the Covenanting Wars of the 1600s, taken by both sides, the Royalists and the other side in the Covenanting Wars, and changed hands again, as we see. Some stay long term in one family, and some are the constant toing and froing between powerful families, and this is one that changed hands, notably between the Campbells and the MacIans. It was used as a Hanoverian or government garrison in 1745 when Bonnie Prince Charlie landed. He landed at Glenfinnan, so not too far away, and it was used as a Hanoverian government garrison. You may remember when I did the first Jacobite week nearly a year ago, that not long after the Jacobite defeat at Culloden, there was an instruction to all supporters of the Jacobite cause that they had to relinquish their weapons, and this resulted in the Disarming Act of August 1746. Within 5, 6, 7 days of the Battle of Culloden, which of course was in April 1746, within days of that, notices were issued across the Highlands, circulated, instructing the surrender of arms. And Mingaray Castle was of the one of the buildings, one of the places where weapons could be surrendered. And the reason I've picked this just to this castle to mention out of all the ones I could have done is that we hold a copy of that order in our Lochaber Archive Centre. It's an original. It's dated 23rd of April 1746. It's from the West Highland Museum collection, and again I've done a talk on West Highland Museum records, so you can have a look at that if you're interested. But again, it's one of those things that if you have grown up in this country, then Culloden is just something that is, that you know about, that's in your consciousness. If you grew up near here, it was somewhere you went for school trips and things like that. And so to grow up and to work in a job where you can hold an instruction for the surrender of arms after the Battle of Culloden is a real privilege. And that was why I wanted to touch on Mingaray Castle, just to mention that when I look at that building, I know we hold that record that tells that little part of that story of that building, but also of this nation. Mingaray Castle was in imminent danger of collapse, and it was saved in 2013 by the creation of the Mingaray Castle Preservation and Restoration Trust, and they secured funding to repair the castle, and extensive renovations were undertaken, and it now operates as a hotel. So I'm aware I've got about 5 minutes left, so we're going to cross over to Skye. Our Skye and Lochaber Archive Centre has a beautiful collection of watercolours of castles in Skye. Really lovely, and you'll see some of them, I'm sure, on their Facebook page. They are really beautiful watercolour paintings. Now I'm going to talk just about a couple of castles on Skye. I am aware again that there are castles on Raasay, there are castles on in other areas surrounding Skye, so but I'm going to focus on these. And again, Skye is a place that is home to a really diverse range of castles, all significant but all interesting for different reasons. So for instance, Duncraig Castle, which I've spoken about in several weeks, which is an Alexander Ross building, so I mentioned it last week, served as a school, served as a hospital. Skye has Armadale Castle, which is the home of Clandonald. It is a ruined castle now, but it still operates as a visitor attraction, but also has gardens and library and Clandonald archives. And they hold their own collections there, and do have a look at their website. It's really interesting about the history of Clandonald. Dunvegen Castle, which was built in around about the 1200s, added to and extended for about 600 years. The seat of Clan MacLeod for over 800 years. So again, a building that connects to one family for a long time. And again, they hold their own archive collections, so do have a look at their website as well if you're interested, either in Clan MacLeod for Dunvegan or Clandonald for Armadale. There is Dunskeith Castle, so sometimes called Dunskeith, that's how I would pronounce it, but also known as Dunskaha, so either will serve, which is home to the legendary warrior queen Skaha, and numerous stories and legends associate with that building, including the story that it was built overnight. And the poem goes, "All the night the witch sang, and the castle grew up from the rock, with the tower and turrets crowned. All night she sang, and when morning dew fell, 'twas finished round and round." So there are myths and legends and all sorts of things associated with our castles. But aside from the legends associated with Dunskeith, the castle seems to date from around about the 14th century, and it was the residence of the McCaskells. But as we've seen with some of the other castles we've talked about, it gets caught up in the politics and the conflict and the turmoil and the power struggles. It passed to the MacLeods, but it was frequently raided by the MacDonalds, and finally Hugh MacDonald of Slate took possession in the late 1400s. It was finally abandoned in the early 17th century in favour of Duntulm, which became where the MacDonalds lived for a while. So again, you can see, and I was just speaking to my colleague Catherine in Skye about this morning, you can see the journey of a family. So you can see where the MacDonalds have been and which castles they've stayed in at what point. But I'm going to finish with one final castle, because I was so struck by how similar this story was to the one that I started with. This is Castell Uchten, which translates as Hugh's Castle. Hugh's Castle, Castell Uchten, was built in about the 1620s. It is much less elaborate than some of the buildings I've mentioned. So I've spoken, for instance, about Dunrobin, which is that very, very elegant sort of French-looking style building. This is a totally different type of building. This is a simple and unsophisticated, uncomplicated building, a solid rectangular tower. But again, built on a cliff edge, built a few miles north of Portree, overlooking Loch Nysortbeg. It looks like it was only about 15 metres by 10 metres. And the Hugh, or the Uchten of the name, was Uchten mac Gillespie Curlich. Now, again, I am not a native speaker, so please forgive me if I have not said that correctly. But he was the nephew of Donald Gorm MacDonald, who was the 5th chief of Slate. He, as I've mentioned, this is a violent and tumultuous age, and he was notable even in that age for being violent and something of a character. He was accused of piracy, of murder, of treachery, and he built Castell Uchten for himself. And his plan was, at the celebrations of the opening of the castle, his plan was to murder the chief and the other senior members of the clan and seize control of the clan for himself. But the plot was uncovered, and Uchten was thrown into the dungeons at Duntulm, which apparently, Catherine was telling me, is now considered to be incredibly haunted and possibly one of the reasons that the MacDonalds left. Now, for his punishment, he was fed salt beef and no water. So he again food was withheld, then he was given salted food and no water, so that he died of thirst. Exactly the same as what is believed to have happened to John Sinclair just a few years previously in Sinclair, Garnico, where we started. I'm going to stop there, remarkably near to time. I may come back and do a second series on castles, as there are just so many stories, and as you know, stories is what I'm all about. I hope that you have enjoyed a whistle-stop tour of some of the castles in the Highlands. Again, if you haven't had a chance to complete our survey, please do. I saw a comment coming up saying someone had a problem filling it out, so we will look into that, and but it would be good to hear if anyone has been able to fill it out fine without any issues. I would be pleased to hear that. So please do fill out the survey, I would really appreciate it. I hope you can join me next week. I'll be looking at the 45 in the Battle of Culloden. Some of that will be replicated and enlarged in the talk that Anne, our family historian, and I are doing on the evening of the battle itself. A reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer, that High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part in these events, but if you're able to donate, then we truly, truly appreciate it, so thank you for that. And thank you. I'm seeing some comments, people saying that they're going to go and visit some of these castles, so that's excellent. And I know Jenny last week suggested that I do a kind of tour of places I've spoken about, so maybe I will do that. Maybe once I'm really allowed out again, we'll put together a little video of some of the places that we've spoken about this year. But in the meantime, I'll speak to you next week, and thank you so much for joining me.